At its peak, the British Empire did not look temporary. It looked permanent. Red spread across world maps like a stain that could never be washed away. British ships ruled the oceans. British law governed trade. British banks decided who received capital and who was cut off from it. 1/4 of the human population lived under British control. London was not simply a capital city. It was the financial command center of the world. And that is what made the collapse so invisible. Because empires that fall quietly are the ones history misunderstands the most. This is not a story about lost battles or military defeat. It is a story about numbers, ledgers, loans, and the hidden cost of pretending power is free. Britain did not lose its empire to rebellion alone. It lost it because it financed global dominance long after it stopped being affordable. Empire is often described as conquest, but conquest is cheap. Maintenance is ruinous. Every colony required soldiers, administrators, judges, railways, ports, prisons, and intelligence networks. These systems did not exist to generate profit. They existed to maintain control. India alone required vast manpower just to function. Africa demanded permanent military presence to suppress unrest. The Middle East required endless political bargaining backed by force. At first, the empire generated surplus. Raw materials flowed in, finished goods flowed out. Taxes filled British coffers. But over time, the balance shifted. Colonies became harder to control. Resistance grew. Administration expanded. Costs rose faster than returns. Britain was no longer extracting wealth. It was subsidizing control. Yet shrinking the empire was unthinkable. Empire had become Britain's identity, its prestige, its proof of greatness. So Britain chose another option. It borrowed. By the late 19th century, competitors were catching up. Germany industrialized at astonishing speed. The United States produced steel, coal, and oil more efficiently. Global trade no longer revolved around Britain alone. Instead of retreating, Britain doubled down. Debt financed naval expansion. Debt funded colonial policing. Debt preserved the image of dominance. As long as the pound was trusted, the illusion held. Then came World War I. This was not only a military catastrophe, it was a financial rupture. Britain burned through gold reserves at a historic pace. It sold overseas investments that had taken generations to accumulate. It liquidated assets that formed the backbone of imperial wealth. By 1917, Britain was borrowing from the United States simply to keep fighting. That moment marked a turning point. For the first time in centuries, Britain was no longer the world's banker. It was a debtor. The war ended in victory, but the empire that emerged was fundamentally weaker. The interwar years were built on denial. On paper, the empire still existed. Maps stayed red. Parades marched through London. But behind closed doors, the empire was being refinanced. Colonial unrest intensified. Suppressing rebellion became more expensive. Returns diminished. Britain was paying yesterday's imperial bills with tomorrow's promises. Then came World War II. This time, there was no financial recovery. Britain spent everything. Gold reserves vanished. Foreign investments were sold at desperate prices. Factories were bombed. Shipping routes were destroyed. By 1945, Britain had won the war militarily. But economically, it was finished. Bankrupt nations do not hold empires. To survive, Britain turned to the United States. The loans arrived. But they came with conditions. End imperial trade preferences. Open colonial markets. Accept the dominance of the dollar. This was not generosity. It was a transfer of global power without invasion. The pound lost its role as the world's currency. The dollar replaced it. And without financial dominance, empire becomes theater. Decolonization followed, not because Britain became moral, but because Britain became insolvent. India was no longer profitable to control. Africa drained more resources than it returned. The Middle East became politically volatile and financially unsustainable. Letting go was not charity. It was emergency cost-cutting. Then came Suez. In 1956, Britain tried to act like an empire one last time. Militarily, it could still strike. Financially, it could not withstand pressure. The United States threatened the pound. Britain withdrew. No battlefield defeat, no formal surrender, just submission to economic reality. That was the moment the illusion finally died. The British Empire did not collapse in fire or revolution. It collapsed in silence. Here is the truth history avoids. Empires fall when debt replaces surplus, when maintenance costs exceed extraction, when financial dependence replaces sovereignty. Britain did not lose its empire. It outspent it. And that leaves an uncomfortable question.